Hi David, thank you for joining me today.
My pleasure.
I thought it'd be really interesting to talk about not only your career with dogs, but also the world of show dogs, really, because it's something that I'm not particularly familiar with, and I have handled Rottweilers in the breed ring very briefly, and I've become to be aware that it's quite a skilled form of dog training, and there's far more to showing a dog than just standing there and hoping that the dog will, look good for you.
Well, Ross, I'm really pleased that you answered that question, because one of the banes of my life and the life of many judges is that so many people think that showing dogs just means taking a dog in the ring and hoping for the best, and don't understand that they'd have such a much better experience if the dog was trained and was not jumping around and could be looked over by the judge properly and have a much better chance of winning a prize. But too many people do not realise that.
And of course there are some very skilled dog handlers, obviously in all breeds, that are very au fait with showing that breed. And some of those handlers can make dogs, some of the poorer specimens, look incredibly good, and vice versa. Those of us that are inexperienced at showing dogs can make a very good dog look quite poor because we don't know what we're doing.
That is exactly right. And so many people with a really good dog then resent the winning that's done by somebody with a not such good dog but excellent handling skills, because they will 9 times out of 10 probably do better than the one that's untrained, which perhaps shouldn't be, but that's the way things are, and that's how life is.
Yeah. So before we continue, for those people that don't know you, what is your involvement with dogs, and how many years has that been over?
Well, it's been a long time, and I have to say it was entirely accidental. Many years ago, we moved to a village, on the edge of a village. But we were married and we compromised and got a puppy. But part of the compromise was that I chose the breed, and I went through a book and picked the breed that I liked, and that happened to be a very little known breed called the Finnish Spitz, which are not easy to handle in the ring. A friend of mine used to say the last one that stands still is a wimp. So they're all pretty lively.
And how did you pick that breed? Was that just based on aesthetics initially?
Just aesthetics. I just looked at pictures and I said, well, I like that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we finally got. So I've been in dogs now since 1969, and we began showing the following year. And since then I have become fascinated with it. In some ways, I don't have the same emotional attachment to dogs as perhaps my wife does, and I would think you do, because it is likely that you've always felt that you wanted a dog, always felt you needed a dog, and certainly Angela, whose parents had fox terriers, felt that. I've always been a little bit distant from it. I think because there isn't quite that emotional involvement, and I do love my dogs, I do assure you, I'm able to be a little bit separate. I started life as a teacher, so I'm used to taking decisions. I think probably I'm a better judge because I'm not so emotionally involved as otherwise. And since then, I've been involved in the administration of dog shows, and I'm now chairman of one of the country's biggest shows, the Championship Dog Show at Southern Counties, which is held at Newbury every year. And I've become a judge, and I now give breeds at the top level.
So when did you began showing your own dog in 1969, did you say?
70 actually. We bought her in 69 and we started showing in 70. She became a champion. She was a very good specimen.
And then did you progress to breeding dogs and showing?
We bred dogs. Angela is, the breed is Finnish Spitz, which is the national breed of Finland. And Angela is considered by the Finns to be one of the best breeders of Finnish Spitz in the world. I would not. I do the technical stuff, the mating, the whelping, making sure that they can breathe. Angela chooses which is the best dog and the best bitch. That's her.
Yeah, so she's
ability.
Got the eye.
She's got the eye.
Excellent.
And she is brilliant in that sense. But over the years, I gradually got to know other breeds, to like other breeds. So I began to judge Samoyeds and Siberian Huskies.
And how do you go about that? How do you progress from being a show handler with your pet dog to start with, to progress to, do you go to, you move on, you progress to judging one breed and then...
You usually start judging your own breed, and in the time that, over the past 40 years, most judges get sucked gradually in. Somebody says, oh, well, you look interested and you seem to know what you're doing, why don't you judge at this show or that show? And you get involved gradually. There's a much more professional approach coming in now, whereby there's an expectation that you will know a lot before you start. And so the Kennel Club have just built what they call the Judges Competency Framework. So these days you really have to take a decision as to whether you want to judge dogs, and then there's a process through which you go. Whereas for most of the people judging now, it came about more or less by accident.
And do you, when you progress into other breeds, was there, you've just explained that there is now a certain level of competency that you require. Was there previously that you could...
Not really. Over the first few years that I judged, until 1980, there was nothing that taught you about a breed. You stood around the ring of the breeds you were interested in, you talked to other people, you gradually absorbed knowledge. And I found after about 10 years, so we're now in 1980, that there was a demand for genuinely independent information. And that is when I began the Animal Care College, which started with a course called the Judging Diploma, which I designed. I was a teacher, so creating syllabus was relatively easy for me, and I created a syllabus which still works. And a lot of people at that time took on the idea of proper training, and they went out into their own breeds, and then they started to run seminars and things throughout the 80s and 90s until in 2000 the Kennel Club started to take all that into consideration and begin to put a framework together.
So when you are judging a dog, you're looking at obviously the Kennel Club have breed standards, so you're looking at the dog physically to see which dog in that ring most closely comes to the standard as it...
Precisely right. You're not judging one dog so much against another as judging it against what you, in your own mind, see as the perfect dog as described by the standard. And the reason why there are so many differences is that people, in their own minds, interpret the standard slightly differently. Mm-hmm. So you can have two dogs which will swap positions, two very, very, very good dogs which will swap positions throughout their career.
Yes. Because
the judges have a slightly different view of what the standard is. And that's part of the excitement and the pleasure of it, really.
And presumably if those dogs are close or very close to the breed standard as it's interpreted, then there are other little factors that perhaps the judges look at differently. For example, whether it's the feet or the eyes or the tail carriage or something like that.
That is true. Broadly speaking, you divide your judging into two parts. There's an understanding of the breed standard, i.e. what the dog should look like to your eye. There is also whether the dog is a healthy individual of the breed and a dog which is well constructed and moves properly. So, in your own breed, most people will be more concerned about the finer details of the standard, as you've just described, than they are about the rest of it, whereas an all-rounder, somebody who judges many breeds, will usually start with the structure of the dog and to make sure that it is sound and that it moves properly. Now, it's not either or, there's a degree of emphasis in both, but nevertheless, it is something to consider. So I would look at the dog that comes into the ring, and the first thing I want to know that it is the right shape, that it is constructed properly, that it moves well. Then I move on to whether its ears are long enough or pricked enough, or whether its markings are correct. Whereas a specialist will go in and they will look at the ears, and they'll look at the shape of the eye, and they will look at the coat quality, and then afterwards they will look more carefully possibly at how the dog moves.
Mm. So how many breeds do you judge now?
Well, I have judged most breeds in this country at open show level. The highest level is championship show level, where the judge is, where challenge certificates are available. Now, to become a champion, a dog has to get 3 challenge certificates from 3 different judges, 2 of which must be earned after it's 12 months old. That's the basic definition. And to judge at challenge certificate level, because the kennel clubs are in the challenge certificates are in the gift of the kennel club has to authorise you to judge at that level. Right. And I'm authorised by the kennel club to judge at 30 breeds at that level, though I've judged most of the others at open show level. And I also judge 3 groups, the utility, working and pastoral groups, and I give best in show at championship show level.
And what I find always interesting, because I watch, Crufts, for example, and various dog shows and things on the TV, and I can understand when you're judging a breed, and as you've already said, you're not judging a dog against other dogs in the ring, you're judging the dog by the breed standard. But how is it far more difficult to judge, say, for example, a group of dogs, like the utility group, where you have lots of different breeds, and you have, how do you go about doing that?
But I think you put your finger on it when you talked about the breed standard. You are not comparing a poodle with a Tibetan Spaniel. You're comparing the poodle with its standard. How closely does it fit its standard? How closely does the Tibetan Spaniel fit its standard? And the one that you feel fits it best is the one that you choose. Now, clearly it is quite difficult for judges to be totally aware of every breed standard in considerable detail. There are some judges that are brilliant. They've got nearly photographic memories, and they really know their stuff, and they are our best judges. But the vast majority of us have to look. We know all the standards quite well, so we have to make a judgment, and that's often on the basis of movement, and it's often on the basis of what's called showmanship. The dog stands up, makes itself look good, and is well handled and well trained, which is where we started.
Yeah, excellent. And when you're looking at dogs on the move, so you see, when you're watching a dog show, you see the judge will repeatedly perhaps get people to move back and forward. What are you looking for when that's going on? Because you've done a physical examination of the dog, haven't you? You've touched the dog, you've looked at the teeth and the eyes and the ears and everything else.
You have. The key thing is the dog structure. And each dog has an outline, and within that outline there is a structure, a bone structure, which will enable it to usually move well. These are generalizations. There are some breeds which are different to others, but nevertheless the judge needs to know that. Then, assuming that the structure is right, the judge will ask the dog to move. Now, you need to see the dog in profile. You need to be sure that the stride is sufficient for the breed. For instance, in a Siberian Husky, you have a stride because of the work that they were originally bred to do. The stride has to be a long stride. Other breeds can get away with shorter strides. So you want to make sure that the dog is moving smoothly. I mean, the back will always go up and down, but it cannot do other stuff. But you don't want a choppy movement. No. You want to see that it's smooth. You've got to make sure that the front leg that is going out as far as possible is moving back as it hits the ground, because some dogs are structured in a way that it hits the ground before the leg starts going back, and that can cause damage to the pastern. You must make sure the dog is not overreaching, i.e. the rear legs are not interfering with the front legs, so a dog has to adjust for that if its structure means that happens. And then when you see the dog coming and going, you want to see that it is the legs are moving straight, they're not crooked, they're not waving about. It's again a question of smoothness and style, which it comes after a lot of experience. Lots of people say, "Oh, that dog's not moving very well." They often have not really looked at movement, and it takes a lot of practice.
I'm sure that's quite a pressure job as well, isn't it? To be, out there observing the dogs with the expectations of the handlers and everybody else observing
The first
show.
time you go into a breed to give, well, the first time you judge, I think that's quite a tense moment anyway, but you soon get used to that part. But the first time you give tickets for the first time you give tickets, that can be a terrifying experience. Particularly if you're not sure that you're ready. Somebody might have asked you to judge, as they did. They asked me to judge several years ago a breed called Affenpinchers, which is a small toy dog, looks a bit scruffy, usually black. And they are an extraordinarily difficult breed to judge because of the standard and because of their structure. And although I'd fulfilled all the qualifications and I'd done all the work, actually I knew how difficult they were to judge. And I was terrified going into the ring. As it happened, I apparently did okay, so that's good.
You got the approval of the other.
You don't just swan into the ring and wave your hands about and hope for the best.
No.
Or perhaps some people do.
Yeah, perhaps they do. And over the very many years that you've been judging, have you seen noticeable changes within breeds, in their physical appearance or their behaviour and temperament in the ring? Yes.
Over the past 40 years, there have been a lot of changes that have been wrought for a lot of different reasons. So it's generally speaking, the dogs that win tend to be more showy. So they stand taller, they stand more proudly, and they're usually got a bit more substance. And judges, particularly those who don't know the breeds very well, will tend to pick those because they look safe. Some judges sometimes pick dogs because they recognise the handler, but that is a different issue. The dogs that are that little bit stronger and that little bit more forceful, have got more that personality, will tend to do a little better. And so breeders will tend to breed dogs that look like that.
Yes, yeah.
Whereas the correct type might not be like that. And a very, very good example is Border Collies. Border Collies have been bred to herd sheep for many, many years. But about 25, nearly 30 years ago, they were brought into the Kennel Club register. And those Border Collies that were registered with the International Collie Club were allowed to be registered at the Kennel Club. Now, those dogs were quite slight, very muscular. And I always describe them as, when you look at them, you need to feel that they can crouch to the ground in a fraction of a second. And they should be able to be flexible enough to turn almost within their own space. Now, many of the Border Collies today, which are winning, are much heavier, much more substance. They move beautifully. Nobody's suggesting that they don't. But they don't have that immediacy that would be required. And most of them would run out of steam after an hour in a field, whereas the slightly longer, lower dog that could really move quickly would last all day. And
I think, like you said, using the Border Collie as an example, you see that not just in Border Collies, do you? In a multitude of breeds, we have the working line of dog and the show dog. I'm not quite sure where that came from. Is it because you think when you're breeding for the show ring, you are breeding for aesthetics, you're not breeding for the dog to function as it was originally developed?
Well, we like to think we are, but in fact, we are breeding to win. And the dogs that are winning will be the ones that you want to breed dogs like that. And if they are bigger and stronger, taller or shorter, then that's what breeders will tend to do, because there's a tendency, although much as we like to say it doesn't happen, there's a tendency for a degree of short-termism. So we want something that will win tomorrow, not something that will be an example of a breed as it was perhaps 20, 30, 40 or 50 years ago.
So do the breed standards, the official breed standards that you're judging against, do they change periodically? Or is it just someone's
The
perception?
Kennel Club, or usually at the behest of the breed clubs, will make small modifications to the standards occasionally. On a couple of occasions, they've gone through all of them and tidied them up, but not actually changed the detail. But generally speaking, the standards don't change very much.
So
For instance, there's a dog called Chow 8 from the 1860s, a picture of which is in the Kennel Club. And it is a beautiful child. And they put that dog on the table and they wrote the standard from that dog. Chows don't look like that now.
No. But the standards is the same.
The standard's the same.
So what changes, because as you said, there are changes in the breed, and is that just fashions change and we like...
Fashion. Yes, it's partly fashion. We like dogs that are... we are influenced by advertising.
Yeah, so we like dogs with longer coats or with flatter faces or with...
That's right. Don't forget that people, as a social animal, like things that are different. We like to do things that make us stand out. So if you are... an example is the young man who wants to make an impact. He wants to have a dog that makes him feel superior. So he wants a big, well-set dog like an American Staffordshire Bull Terrier or American Staffordshire Bull Terrier. Whereas if you've got somebody who is part of the country set, they want something that's elegant and graceful and shows off their taste. So they might have a rescue greyhound at one end of the scale, or they might have an Afghan or Saluki at the other end of the scale.
Yeah.
It doesn't stop people having those dogs in between because they like them.
Yes.
But there is a tendency for dogs to represent us in the way in which we like to be seen.
Mm. Yeah, an extension. I mean, and obviously fashions change as well with popularity. I mean, working Cocker Spaniels and things like that,
right,
that will never do a day's work in their life, are very popular at the moment, as are the sort of designer breeds, so to speak, the Cockapoos and the Labradoodles and things.
Well, yes, I think that's absolutely true. And those have developed primarily, I think, because there has been an awful lot of criticism of pedigree dogs because of the various problems. Most of them relatively minor, but nevertheless they do have them. And the idea was that if you cross two different breeds, you'd get an improved health result. It's not true, but nevertheless, that fundamental sort of philosophy has started to permeate perhaps 20, 25 years ago. Mm-hmm. So people think, well, if you buy a crossbred dog, you're going to have less health problems with them.
Yeah, which, as you said, is not true.
I don't think it's true.
And now you're paying for a crossbred dog a fair amount of money.
Oh yes, sometimes more than the pedigree dog.
Yeah,
just
absolutely.
amazing. It's amazing.
Yeah.
And they've been marketed by the people that breed them. Generally speaking, so-called crossbred designer dogs, trying not to generalise too much, but people breed them because they can get a lot of money for them.
Yeah.
Most pedigree dog breeders, not all by any means, but most of them breed them because they love the breed and they want to extend its life into the future, and they are very interested in the history of the past.
Yes.
Well, clearly you don't have a history with a designer dog.
No, absolutely. Do you think that people generally, and it's a generalisation, but people within the show fraternity are doing enough to promote the health and responsible ownership?
I think small breeders are doing a great deal because you've got to remember that the vast majority of small breeders of pedigree dogs have their dogs as companions. I mean, sometimes you will get the impression from what you hear about crufts that they are special in some way, but their dogs are their pets. And the smaller breeders who breed a litter occasionally, we call them hobby breeders, are the ones who have got usually the best interests of their dogs at heart, will carry out the genetic tests and physical tests that are required, the x-rays for elbows and hips, and they will do a great deal. There will be a group who see their dogs as an ability to earn money. Of course they will. And of course there will be the mass breeders of puppies whose job it is, their role is to make money. I mean, they breed puppies and they sell them to others who sell them on. So it's very difficult to generalise. But when I'm talking about dog breeds, I'm talking about the smaller breeds, the smaller breeders who really have the best interests of their pets at heart and breed because they want to have a dog in which they want to show, or they want to use for agility or obedience or any of the other canine disciplines, or simply because they want to be sure that when their older dog dies, they've still got a dog of the same breed as their companion.
Yeah. What you see commonly, I mean, we've got, there's lots of dog shows going on every weekend, really.
Yes, there are.
All involving pedigree dogs, and sometimes you get people protesting about pedigree dogs, saying that we shouldn't be breeding dogs. Actually, our rescue centres are inundated with dogs of all types and breeds, and therefore we should perhaps have a ban on breeding for a while until some of those are rehomed. What are your thoughts on people that think we shouldn't be breeding as we are?
Well, they're wrong. That's the first thing. You make a very good point about the rescues, but if you go to any rescue centre, the number of pedigree dogs that you will see is very small. There's two reasons for this. Usually because people who have got a pedigree dog tend to look after it quite well. The second reason is that the breed societies rehome more dogs than all the other rescue centres put together. So that if my breed is Finnish Spitz, if there's a Finnish Spitz that we have bred that is for one reason, through divorce or death or emigration, no longer lead, we will find a home for it.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to go to a rescue centre. So if you do go to a rescue centre, and remember I was a senior manager at Battersea Dogs Home for 11 years, you will see the dogs that other people by and large don't want.
Yeah.
They're the ones that have got, at one time, the rescue centres just took in the dogs off the street. But with the 1992 Clean Neighbourhoods Act, when the responsibility for stray dogs moved over to local authorities from the police, the local authorities took that responsibility seriously. The reason is that if you are involved in an environment department of a local authority, the biggest complaints you get are about dogs and about rubbish collection. I was chairman of an environment committee of a district council, so I do know that's the case. So they really did do a very good job. So we don't get the strays that we used to. We get dogs that escape and come home, but they don't get the strays. So when you go to a rescue centre, whether it be Battersea or Manchester or one of the smaller ones, you get a lot of Staffordshire Bull Terriers, which are wonderful with children, almost always, but terrible with other dogs. You get a lot of crossbreds and mongrels. The vast majority get there because they are not well enough trained and they're giving their owners problems. And you get divorce, you get death, those are all also problems. But nevertheless, generally speaking, my experience has been that if a family breaks up or if an elderly person dies, the family do something about the dog and find a home for it. So now we find rescue centres are packed full of dogs that have behavioural problems. So that's why they're there.
And you saying about the Staffordshire Bull Terrier, using that as an example, because we all know rescue centres are flooded with Staffordshire Bull Terriers. Yes. I've worked for breed-specific rescues with Great Danes, German Shepherds and Rottweilers. And when those dogs end up in the breed-specific rescues, whatever breed they are, that I've noticed when I've been working with them, is that they are not very well-bred dogs. The Great Danes and the Rottweilers and the German Shepherds, the majority of those in rescue are not what you would see in the breed ring.
Poor quality. Yeah,
poor quality, poorly bred dogs that people have probably paid £200 or £300 for a puppy, when actually the going rate is £900 to £1,000 or perhaps more. And so perhaps the breeders that are caring for their dogs are showing their dogs in the breed ring, and not the people responsible for even the pedigree dogs in rescue homes.
Yes, I think that can be true. If somebody has got a Great Dane and somebody else around the corner on the next street has got a Great Dane, they think, oh, I could get £600 or £700 a week for these and there'll be 10 puppies. They will just do it without thinking. And curiously, I've just recently come across the statistic that about, I think it's between 50 and 70% of all breeds registered are only registered by a person once. Mm-hmm. So they only mate their dogs once.
Yes.
So they make a few quid, and those are the dogs that tend to be A, not shown, and B, when they do get to a rescue centre, not of good quality. And also they may not have been given the right sort of socialisation during their early puppyhood that enables them to become what the Kennel Club calls a good citizen dog.
Yeah. And what perhaps lots of people aren't too aware of is that most people within a breed do an awful lot for their own breed in rescue. So they collect money at shows, they have the presence of breed-specific rescues at those shows and things like that. So they do, aside from the individual breeders most often, decent professional responsible breeders taking their dogs back if people are unable to cope with them, they're also doing an awful lot to promote the breed and to work with those dogs that are unfortunately needing rehoming.
Yes, Ross, that's absolutely right. And as I mentioned earlier, the number of dogs, pedigree dogs that are rehomed, the number of dogs overall that are rehomed by the breed clubs is greater than certainly the number of dogs that are rehomed by the charities. One of the things that you have to remember is that these people are working on a shoestring. They will just have, one of their members may have a few kennels that they use, they do it for virtually nothing. So if you feel you want to do something for rescue dogs, particularly, then try and search out your local rescue, and certainly if you're interested in the breed rescue, because they can do with your money. There are organisations most people have never heard of. Everybody's heard of the big charities, and that's where most of the money, and certainly the money from wills, goes. Now, I'm not saying they don't do a good job, and I'm not saying that they don't need some, but it is the smaller rescue services that actually do a lot of the hard graft and are worth supporting.
Yeah, absolutely, I agree. And I know lots and lots of people that volunteer, that work tirelessly driving up and down the country to pick up dogs and drop them off, and
absolutely
other private kennels that do an awful amount of work behaviourally and training-wise to rehome those dogs and ensure they have an onward happy life. So yeah, I agree completely.
Yeah. And that is, I think we are decor as far as a friend of mine always used to say, and I think that's important too. But going back to the key point that dogs in rescue centres primarily there because of their behaviour issues, and that is not because they are bad dogs. It is because there may be some, like there are some bad people, but by and large it is because they have not been trained properly and given the right socialisation from the nest, not once they are 8 weeks old, but right from the very beginning. The mother will look after them and they will train them to be clean. You just have to continue that and continue socialisation until those puppies go to their new owners, and their new owners are entrusted with their continued training. And I think good breeders will take an interest in those puppies as they grow up. If they're if new owners particularly are left on their own, then it is a recipe for disaster, because dogs, by their very nature, will try and be in charge and in control and do their own thing. They're selfish. What do you expect? Yeah. They have to be brought into the family and behave as all the family members behave, i.e. to understand other people's needs and live within the framework.
Yeah, David, I've been working as a canine behaviourist for the last 20-something years, and I agree with you entirely. I think when you have a decent breeder, a responsible breeder, they do care about where their puppies go. They do give the potential new owner a really hard time about why they're deserving of one of their dogs, what are they going to do with it, where do they live, what's their house like, how many children have they got, and they're interested in the future of the dog and what contingency they have in place, what happens if they can't keep the dog. They want the dog to go back to them. And you do see that people that buy dogs from other sources or irresponsible breeders that are not experienced with dogs and puppies, then it can be an incredibly difficult thing to raise a puppy, particularly with some of the more challenging breeds, and people do find it very difficult. It can lead to family disputes, lots and lots of problems, neighbour disputes, and of course ultimately people do end up either euthanasing the dog or putting the dog into rescue simply because they can't cope and they haven't been able to source the right training help.
I couldn't agree with you more. It is a pattern which many of us, you and I, through the various activities that I've gone through, is a pattern we're trying to break. But it is very, very difficult because people love their dogs. They have an emotional attachment to them, and they don't like to. I don't mean discipline them in any harsh sort of way, but they don't like to set boundaries for them. When they jump on the bed or the settee, they think, "Oh, isn't that sweet?" Instead of saying, giving them a titbit and saying, on the floor, titbit, so that they get used to not doing those sorts of things, which would make life for them all so much easier.
It would. I think the problem is that there is some conflicting information with the internet, that as we have now, we have lots of access to lots of information, and people clearly have lots of different opinions about how we should be raising dogs, training dogs, living with dogs, all of those things. And as a novice dog owner, going online to try to decipher what we should be doing, you've got people that say you shouldn't be telling your dog no, everything should be done with love and positively, and sometimes you can't do all of that because it doesn't work and the dog becomes even more unruly. So, and people do, I think they go to the internet for the first port of call. It used to be that they'd go to their vet, and then their vet may refer to someone like me. But now, of course, they go online, try to solve the problems themselves, and some of the information that's out there can actually exacerbate the problems that they're experiencing. And they think they've tried hard enough because they followed this advice, and then the dog still gets passed on because of that information fails them.
Yes, I think this is absolutely right. But given that, we have to recognise that we've got about 8 million dogs in the country, and although there are occasionally problems, it's a relatively small proportion. Most people who they've got an unruly dog don't let it out, don't let it off the lead, and therefore the thing is, the problem is contained. But it would be much better if everybody understood the steps they need to take from the nest to maturity that would help.
Yeah, and of course most responsible breeders, they will give their puppy owners that support, certainly for the first few months, but probably for the life of the dog anyway. So if you choose your breeder wisely, then you should have that support, and they should also be able to signpost you to other people that can help you out should you need be.
Absolutely, I think that is essential. And most of these things are not complicated.
No.
If you have got a dog, as they're brought to you, which has a serious behavioural problem, it is difficult to solve. But most of the things that people have to do to ensure that their dog is well behaved, if they start at the beginning, are not difficult.
No, it can be very simple. Coming back to a point that you made earlier, you said something very interesting. You were talking about the Staffordshire Bull Terrier, and you said that Staffordshire Bull Terriers are typically very nice with people and children and not so nice with other dogs. I'm not sure now whether they are quite as nice with people and children as they used to be, simply due to the popularity of the breed over the last, 10 years. Because people are not breeding them properly. The Staffordshire Bull Terrier type dog that we see on our streets now and are filling up the rescue homes, or have filled up the rescue homes multiple times, they don't look very much like the Staffordshire Bull Terriers you see in the breed ring.
Well, you touch on an extremely important element of dog breeding. Because we were talking earlier about the idea that breeds change structurally and physically as a result of breeders wanting to win or wanting to achieve certain objectives. But what people often don't realise is that that sort of selection you can have selection for temperament. Some changes in structure carry developmental changes as well. For instance, you talked about Rottweilers recently. When I first were giving talks on judging dogs, I remember a lecture I gave, part of which was going over a dog to show how you should check the structure, look at the teeth, check the eyes, generally examine the dog as a judge would do. And after the lecture, a guy in the audience came up to me, who I didn't know at the time, I got to know very well later, called Larry Elston. Now, anybody who knows anything about Rottweilers will remember Larry Elston. He's one of the great Rottweiler breeders. And he said, Mr. Cavell, he said, if you go over a Rottweiler like that, you'll lose your hand. And he taught me how to go over a dog safely. And at that time, I still go over all dogs the same way, even though by and large you don't need to. But the point is, in those days, going over a Rottweiler was, well, not dangerous, but certainly you had to be careful. I mean, a veterinary friend of mine, a very famous vet, Mike Stockman, would never judge Rottweilers because he had been bitten at one stage, I understand, and therefore he didn't judge them at all. And I remember Rottweilers turning, and I remember them growling. Well, they don't now. Most of them are pussycats. But the shape has changed. In breeding for a better temperament, the dogs have got smaller, they've got lower to ground, they've got longer in back, and they've got prettier. I mean, in my view, a pretty Rottweiler is a contradiction in terms. But nevertheless, they are now tidier in every sense, and they have changed. Primarily because people have been trying to breed for Rottweilers with better temperaments.
It reminds me of the Silver Fox project, where they were breeding foxes. They were putting the tamer foxes, they started breeding together, so they're breeding for temperament, and the foxes that were less friendly, they were not breeding. And very quickly, within a couple of generations of breeding, the aesthetics of that animal changed completely. So they went from black in colour to black and white. They started to get floppy ears and things like that. So
tail sets changed.
Tails curled, all sorts of things like that. So lots of the similar things that we see in dog breeds. And it didn't take very long for those changes to occur. And I think what people don't realise is when you are breeding exclusively for aesthetics or for temperament, that there are byproducts either way of doing that.
This is absolutely right. The Russians, back in the early part of the last century, they did a huge amount of research into dog breeding, and they could take 100 strays of all sorts and types, and they could breed a recognisable pedigree dog in 5 generations just by selecting from those groups. It's amazing how quickly that can happen. When I first started judging, if you went into a ring of terriers, fox terriers, I mean, they would deliberately, and in my own breeding, the handlers would deliberately let the dogs stand up against one another to make them look proud, make them stand better. Occasionally a dog tries it, but almost certainly the handler will take it away immediately, perhaps put it to the other end of the ring. And a judge would certainly take that into consideration when they were judging, or they certainly should.
You said about the temperament should be 100%, and I presume you mean 100% for that breed?
100% within the ring, but different breeds still have innately different temperaments. And we also have to remember that breeds with very good temperaments can still be trained to have poor temperaments, and if they are badly brought up, if they do not have the right sort of socialisation, can become less stable as a result of their treatment.
So in the breed ring, you would penalise a dog for a poor temperament, say for example towards another dog, or aggression perhaps in the ring towards another dog when they're moving around. But you wouldn't know whether that was innate or inherent within the dog, or whether that was just learnt through lack of socialisation.
You would not know. You would have to treat them all exactly the same. But you are quite right. It could have a different motivation, a different trigger. So it is something that over the years has been addressed. It is still a work in progress, and in the coming years, one would expect breeds which perhaps 50 years ago you would not have been able to trust with another dog now will behave like the golden retrievers you were talking about earlier on. Whether that's a good thing in terms of the breed's historical context, if it originally was supposed to be sharp, like some of the terriers, that's a different matter. But from my point of view, I want dogs to be safe in communities and in society, because I think dogs are good for people, and if people have dogs, they're usually better as a result and nicer.
Absolutely. When you're judging the various breeds that you judge, is there a difference between the males and the females, or...?
Well, I have to say, I like girls better. And I think I do find judging bitches easier than judging dogs. Now, I can't tell you why that is. It may be that overall bitches are more even, and therefore you don't have the significant differences there are sometimes in stature and size as you do with dogs. There tends to be a wider variety among dogs, and therefore if you've got a dog with a bigger dog with a not very good head against a smaller dog which got a fabulous head, and they both move well, it's sometimes difficult to decide which overall is closer to the standard. Personally, and it's very difficult to generalise about these things, but personally I usually find that the bitches are more even in terms of size and stature, and therefore I can concentrate more on movement, structure and their finer characteristics. But that's a personal thing. Other judges might well go into the ring and say, well, I find judging dogs much easier, and I find all those bitches look the same. It is very much a personal.
And is there any differences in temperament that you've seen? Are the bitches tend to be more malleable and easier to look at?
No, I think bitches overall are usually more difficult within the family. Dogs tend to, again, I know my breed very well, I don't know the others in that context so well. But generally speaking, dogs tend to be, and people tell me, they are more loving, they're more affectionate, they want to sit by you more often, whereas the bitches tend to be a bit more independent, a bit more cat-like. But my breed's temperament is a bit cat-like anyway, so it's very difficult to draw fine conclusions. But generally speaking, I find bitches do have a mind of their own, whereas a dog is perhaps more amenable. But again, that is really a broad generalisation. Other judges will find a different thing, and other breeds will be different.
And are there any differences in the breed group? So, for example, the utility or the pastoral. Are there, when you're judging, do you see major differences within those groups? That
is another very interesting question, because although there are some generalisations you can make, there are a number of anomalies which don't really fit, because these groups were put together fairly arbitrarily in many senses. Because they wanted to group them together in a sensible number of breeds, they nevertheless had to force the issue in some cases. For instance, the hound breeds include the sight hounds like Salukis and greyhounds and Irish wolfhounds, and the scent hounds like beagles, the short-legged scent hounds such as the basset hound, and also one or two breeds they've thrown in because there was nowhere else to put them, and they put in elk hounds and Finnish Spits, for instance, because when they were first brought in, they had hund in the name, which of course in Scandinavia means dog, but they put them in the hound group. So there are variations. The most cohesive groups are the gun dogs and the terriers, and by and large, whether they're short-legged or long-legged, then they have quite similar temperaments. It's also true of the working group, because they by and large tend to be more the bigger guarding breeds, not all of them, but the bigger guarding breeds. So their temperaments are somewhat similar. Toys' temperaments are really very broadly, very broad, because although they're all small, they actually have been bred down from lots of different breeds which had different temperaments to start with. And the utility group, sometimes people say, well, it's the odds and ends go in the utility group because there was nowhere else to put them. So, yes, a lot of what you say, there is some generalisations, but if you use that generalisation, there will always be quite a lot of exceptions.
So, because I work in the training and behaviour arena, so what can people learn if they're considering getting a certain breed of dog, unlike when you first chose the finished bits looking at a picture? What can people learn if they go to a breed show? What could they learn about the potential for that dog to be a family companion for them?
I think it is really good if families can go to a breed show and really talk to people. I mean, everybody will try and sell you their breed, so they will tell you the nice things about them and not the bad things, obviously. But if you can pick out the breeds where you have a connection with, you feel something for the breed, because some people will feel something for the Spitz breeds. I started off in the Spitz breeds, and I tend to be thinking of a breed specialist, and I'm invited to Australia this year to judge a Spitz show out in Australia. But I have a friend who I respect highly who says, David, I don't want to judge any Spitz breeds. I don't understand them. They've got a different, the approach that they give to me is different from the ones that I am more used to, and she is a specialist in working breeds and the Molosser breeds. So there are these differences. You need to go and get a feel for it rather than a book which says good with children, tick. It's not a tick box exercise choosing a dog.
No, and like you said, most breed books are written by people that wish to promote a breed, and therefore do say they're good with children and cats and everything else, and they're wonderful, and the reality somewhat is different in lots of cases.
There are a number of websites that allow you to go through that exercise. I want a dog that is this size, I want a dog that likes exercise or doesn't, and that's not a bad filter. But it is a filter, not a tick box, and therefore you can usually find a group of dogs at the end which is worth investigating. I wouldn't choose on that basis. I would definitely go to a dog show, and I would definitely talk to breeders. I would definitely look at the dogs, with permission, go over the dogs, pet them, and what the family feels is comfortable with is probably what they're going to enjoy most.
And a vast majority of the breeders that you encounter, or the people showing their dogs at the shows, will be keen for you to come to their property and meet their dogs and talk about their breed until the cows come home, won't
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. There are a number of what I refer to as trading kennels. So the trading kennels either breed a lot of puppies themselves, or they bring in puppies from other breeders. And I remember years ago, a good friend of mine and his wife and Andrew and I put together what we call the dog directory. And one of the reasons that we brought that up was because in Crawley there was a big puppy farm, sales kennels, where the puppies were kept in barrels. They were just struggling out at the bottom, and if you liked one, you went in and you picked it out and you went and bought it. And that's not the way to buy a puppy.
No, and sadly, a lot of that still goes on, doesn't it?
There's still a lot of that, though it has to be said that some of the big trading kennels are fulfil all the criteria for looking after the dogs properly, and they have veterinary inspections. There's veterinarians will go in every day. One or two have got employ their own veterinarians. They're big companies. It's a big business now. And remember that a third of most puppies are bought through that sort of outlet. That's 250,000 a year.
Certainly an interesting figure. And as you were saying earlier, that professional breeders, responsible breeders, have an interest in the dog's history and the past, and also in the dog's future. Presumably that's not the case.
Oh no, that's right. Just because they fulfil all the criteria for a licensing officer does not necessarily mean that they have the long-term interests of the puppies they're selling at heart. They may look after them and the boxes are all ticked, but nevertheless they're interested in the profit. That's why they're in business, and therefore they won't be investing in that puppy's future. And I think that is important.
Yeah. So what would your advice be to someone that is now considering getting a puppy? What would your advice to them be?
Well, the first thing is that if the children, and it's often the children in the family, say, I want a puppy, you put them off. I don't mean permanently, but you make sure it is absolutely clear that you have to do your research. Going onto the internet, ask them to use their phones, to use one of these filter systems that most of the big dog food companies have got up. Now, they won't give you the answers, but they will give you a group of breeds that it's worth researching. And make a game of it. Make a game of it with your youngsters and say, well, I'll tell you what we should do is go to a dog show and have a look at these breeds. So you're not confined to going to a particular place where you can just pick one up for a few £100 and then you've got a puppy. That is not the way to do it. Go to a dog show, talk to breeders, get a feel for your family's interest in a particular breed. And it doesn't matter whether it's a terrier or a gun dog or anything else. But do make sure that as you are choosing, you realise what the downsides are. There are some breeds, I mean, Siberian Husky, which is one of my favourite breeds. You can very seldom, however well trained they are, let them off the lead. Because they want to run. They've been bred to run. And many Siberian Huskies come from working stock where running has been bred into them. So it is very important that you research each breed and you think very carefully about what you have and what size it's going to be.
I think, as you say, lots of people, they do look, I mean, Siberian Huskies are beautiful, stunning looking dogs, aren't they? And very few people that go, or very few people that I see, have researched the history of the breed. And of course, we've spoken about border collies earlier on. And when you've got dogs that are designed to run 30, 40 miles a day chasing sheep, and you want to keep those in your penthouse apartment in central London, naturally there's going to be conflict because you haven't researched and you're not able to fulfil those dogs' inherent drives, albeit maybe a moderated version in some of the show lines.
Well, those inherent drives have to have an outlet somewhere, and if they're not exercised thoroughly, it will be in chewing things, it will be in destroying things, it will be jumping up and down, it will be in being hyperactive, and it's not worth it.
No, because that actually can be very distressing. Once you've taken a puppy into your family, and once you realise that that puppy is probably not the right individual for you, or not the individual breed that you should be having, then that can have devastating consequences on the children and the family as a whole if you're not able to keep the dog and work through those problems. Another factor, of course, is the upbringing and the investment of time that other people put into their dogs. So I, as you know, have Rottweilers that I compete in working trials with, so I spend an awful lot of time training my dogs, and often people see those and they're nicer and friendlier than they expected them to be, and think that they're all like that across the board, and of course they're not. And it's easy to go to a dog show and see these dogs running around almost in time with each other and thinking, well, that looks nice, that's easy, I'd like one of those. But of course, all of these people have spent hundreds of hours either attending ringcraft classes or they're very experienced handlers and they've been to hundreds of shows, and the dogs are very trained in behaving in that environment. So that's not an assessment of the dog's likely behaviour when a novice handler takes it home.
Yeah, research is the key. Research, research, research. If you do the research properly and you ensure that your puppy is well trained and socialised, it will be your joy and companion for the rest of your life.
Yeah, which is what we want, isn't it? When we go and buy a puppy, we want a nice, healthy, long-lived family companion to spend time with.
Exactly.
So on that note, David, thank you very much for coming in and joining me today. And it's been a pleasure to talk to you about your experience in the world of dogs and show dogs.
Thank you, and I have thoroughly enjoyed the conversation, Ross. Thank you very much.
wasn't